Hello and welcome to Educated STEM. My name's Kate and I'm the founder of Educated STEM, and today we're continuing the series with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Mahadio Sukai, and we are going to be diving in to a topic which I don't think I've ever discussed with anyone, so I'm excited to hear his take on this. So if you want to go back and watch his previous sets of videos, the first set are about him being a low vision scientist and how that has affected his education and his career. And then the second set, we're diving into all things DEI or IDEA, which is his preferred acronym, where we add in accessibility. Accessibility, I almost spelled it wrong, didn't I?
You almost did, but you'd be surprised how many people would actually say A is accountability.
I kind of like accountability though.
Yes, except that accountability for what and to whom?
Good question. But we're not talking about that. You are going to answer.
No, I'll be good. I'll answer the question that you ask.
You are going to answer, how does the peer review system have built-in biases?
Did you see the article on CNN on, I think it was Monday, about peanut allergies?
I didn't.
So there was an interesting article that was posted on the CNN site on November the 3rd. And the article actually talked about the reason that we now actually expose children to peanut allergens at a very young age in order to minimize the likelihood of peanut allergy. Because when you and I were younger, which wasn't all that long ago, we didn't actually do that. We said if someone's going to be allergic to peanuts, let's not expose them to peanuts. So we're going to cut peanuts out of everything at daycare, right? We're going to cut peanuts out of everything in school. We're going to cut peanuts out of every environment. So no peanuts, and no one will therefore have a peanut allergy, except it doesn't quite work that way. And there was an observation that a scientist made 20 some odd years ago, um, which went something like this. The population of children in Israel, which had the same ethnic background and the same genetic markers that a population of Jewish kids would have in, say, New York City, right, was much less likely to have a peanut allergy than that corresponding population of Jewish kids in New York City, right, or Israeli descended kids in New York City. Now, why was that? Was that because somehow people were allergic to New York? Or was that because something else was going on in Israel that was actually causing a protective effect? Or was that just some manifestation of random chance because there's 7-8 billion people on the planet, and you can actually have some manifestations of random chance because there's so many human beings? Like, what was it about the environment and makeup of kids in Israel versus the environment and makeup of Israeli descended kids in New York that was causing that difference,
Well, it wasn't
right?
New York because New York's fabulous.
Yes, New York is fabulous, but my point was, whether it was New York or not, the argument is the same. There's a it could have been Western Europe, it could have been North America. Israeli descended children in any place but Israel actually had a higher incidence of peanut allergies than Israeli kids.
And why is
And
that?
so the reason for that was because there's actually a snack that infants and toddlers are fed in Israel that contains a pile of peanut protein. And it's a snack that's unique to Israel. It's not found outside of the country.
Well, now I want to
And
try the snack.
hey, so because the kids were exposed from a young age, they developed a resistance to the peanut protein. So they weren't going to be allergic to it, right? And so the exposure prevented the allergy to a significant degree. And they did retrospective studies, and then did a randomized clinical trial to actually prove this, and it led to some landmark changes um, in the recommendations from the College of Pediatrics on how to deal with peanut allergies, right? The whole story unfolded over about 15 years. But here's the thing, and this is a really interesting thing. The scientist who made the observation, who asked the question, was not able to get scientific funding to do the study, not able to get research funding to do the study, right? Not the first go around. He actually got funding from the Peanut Farmers Foundation of America, because they were interested in figuring out how people could actually eat peanuts, obviously, right? Peanut farmers, right? And he actually got roundly criticized for taking what was thought to be tainted money, because peanut farmers obviously had a vested interest in the outcome. But there was no research funder who was actually willing to fund the project, because prevailing wisdom of the time, and the prevailing wisdom for decades at that point in time, was you avoid peanut allergies by not exposing kids to peanuts. Why would you question that? Why would you do it any differently? Right? And I'm fond of saying that inclusive science is good science, Kate. And here's a really good example of it, because what the scientist observed was, in this one specific place, things were different. Why were they different? And they were different not because of geography, but because of a consequence of geography, which is the availability of a certain food offered to kids, and endemically offered to kids in that one location, right? The scientist asked the question, and the peer review committees shot the question down. Why
That's
did
really
they shoot the question down? Right? It was a
they knew
well-formulated
better.
hypothesis, but they shot the question down because they knew better. That's right. Are peer review committees biased? Yes, because peer review committees sometimes think they know better, right? So let's not even talk about the composition of peer review committees. Let's not talk about who's on them. Let's not talk about sort of the framing of questions around disability as deficit model versus environmental or social model. Let's not talk about critical race theory. Let's not talk about gender theory. Let's not talk about disability justice. Let's not talk about any of that. Let's talk about a very simple fundamental fact, and that is that human beings have opinions. Sometimes those opinions are based upon decades of experience, but also based upon a false premise at the root of decades of experience, right?
Except for
And
me, Mahadi, when I have an opinion, it is correct.
you have an evidence-based opinion, Kate, right? And so as long as the evidence is rigorous, then the opinion will be correct, right? So here's another story closer to home. When you and I first met, I was doing work in Canada to understand the experiences of graduate students with disabilities and the barriers that graduate students with disabilities faced. I could never get that project funded. I started doing that work in 2010, just before we met, and the project concluded in 2016. But I spent 2 years kicking tires and trying to get research funding agencies to actually buy the premise of the research. And they kept telling me, there's not enough graduate students with disabilities. Why should we care?
Ooh, that's not good.
Right?
But also, do they
Um,
know the number of graduate students with disabilities? Like, was that ever counted?
but the thing is that it wasn't actually at that time. And thanks to that particular project, we started to uncover what the number was as of 2015, and we have a better sense as to what the number is today because of things that have concatenated out of the project. But at that point in time, we did not have a number. We had a supposition, but it was a supposition that was actually taken as fact. And so project administrators and peer review committees were saying this is a waste of time and effort and money.
Yeah, it's like the stuff when we were doing the stuff with the NPA, and people want data on postdocs, but you have to go out and collect the data
That's
on
right.
postdocs, which
That's
means you
right.
have to ask the institutions what their data on postdocs is. But if they haven't
That's
got
right.
it,
That's exactly right. And and you know what? It's the same issue with things like rare and orphan diseases, right? So this thing is such low incidence and such low prevalence that number one, it's not profitable to do the work. Number two, nobody understands the point of doing the work, and so why would you spend millions or hundreds of millions of dollars behind something that doesn't really impact more than 5,000 people in the entire country? Right? Instead of spending that money on something that impacts 50 million people in the entire country, right? And so arguments get made like that. And as a result of arguments being made like that, and as a result of suppositions, again, even before we get into the whole idea space, right? We come to the fundamental basis of reality, which is that a peer review committee, whether it's reviewing a paper for publication, or it's reviewing research funding applications, or fellowship applications, or even grad school applications, right? That peer review committee is going to look at everything through the lens of the collective experience of the members of that committee. Right. And there's actually another joke that I read somewhere that's worth telling in this particular context, and that's of a paleontologist who discovered something fundamentally novel about the life cycle of their favorite dinosaur. And the paper that they'd written about this actually got rejected, and the reviewer wrote back, "I reject your premise, therefore I will not accept your manuscript."
That's strong.
Right. And that might be a fictional story, it might be entirely apocryphal, but there's a core message in there, and that is that the people who do peer review are actually human beings, and human beings have value judgments and opinions about things, right? And so again, we don't have to talk about DEI or idea. We just have to talk about the fact that peers are reviewing peers, and never mind the quote unquote blinded nature of the process, because everybody's names are supposed to be redacted, right? In a small enough field, you can figure out who wrote the damn paper in a small enough field, right? And if somebody who's reading the manuscript actually rejects the premise and rejects your conclusion no matter what, because you could do the best science, you could do the most rigorous science, but if the person who's reading that says, "I actually don't believe this is a valid question," that's what they're going to say, right? That's how they're going to think, right? I mean, it's, for goodness sakes, it's true in elections, right? So why would it not be true in something like this? Every human being has value judgments, and we can say absolutely we undergo anti-bias training, and we're conditioned to pay attention to what our value judgments are, but our value judgments is still our value judgments, and we're going to still hold strongly to those value judgments, and we will find ways to express those value judgments because we are humans and that is what we do, right? So the peer review system, as a result, is going to be biased. And again, I have not said one word beyond the disclaimer about disability, gender, race, ethnicity, language, religion, anything.
Yeah, you're making me think about a couple of the historical stories that I mentioned in my lecture about the history of the detection and treatment of cancers,
Mhm.
because and I'm probably going to get the names wrong, but I know that hundreds of years ago, I want to say the person was called Percival Potts. He noticed that chimney sweeps had a higher amount of certain types of cancers. And so he put together the hypothesis that because they were going up chimneys and they were getting all soot all over them, that then led to their cancer. And because he was just a general normal person, he wasn't like, that was back in the day when rich people did science. The top echelons of the rich people were like, don't be ridiculous, that's not true. And so they completely disregarded his theory. And then again, when it came to proving that smoking tobacco led to lung cancer, there were two groups doing the research. I'm very familiar with Richard Doll because I used to sit in the Richard Doll auditorium at Oxford University. And so he was looking at the data from our health system and literally looking at what did these people die of and did they smoke or not. And so the data was just naturally collected, and he extrapolated. He did have a co-worker. I don't remember what their name was, but I remember Richard Doll, because again, I used to sit in his very lovely auditorium. And then there were the Americans. And I want to say, I might be wrong, I want to say one of the Americans was an avid smoker. And so he wanted to prove that smoking didn't lead to lung cancer. But then once he started the research, he actually quit smoking because he was like, oh, crumbs. this is actually a cause. So he actually quit during the research because he realized. But I'm pretty sure that, and it's really funny because I see some people credit the British people and then some people credit the American people. Going to say it was Richard Doll. I want to say he published first, so give it to him. But I'm pretty sure people were arguing whether they smoked or not. Because if you do something and it involves your lifestyle, you are going to hold on to it and say, of course, smoking doesn't cause lung cancer because I smoke and I don't want lung cancer. So your bias is right there.
That's right. And I mean, let's actually run with that particular example a little bit more. So I actually had the pleasure of listening to a lecture given by the then president of Canada's equivalent of NIH. And that's an organization called the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And he actually made a really, really interesting argument, which was that 85% of lung cancers can be prevented by not smoking, right? 15% can't be, right? And that's completely fair, but 85% could be prevented by not smoking and not being exposed to secondhand smoke. But we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on EGFR inhibitors, right? And we spend nowhere near as much money on prevention campaigns.
I mean, other than
And
the fact that you have the disease, do they still do that? They put the diseased organs on the packets of cigarettes, and they have the big warning: this will kill you or might kill you. I can't remember.
well,
I'm
I think
not a
it's
smoker.
it's not phrased as a will. I think it's phrased as a might. I've never smoked a cigarette a day in my life, but I can also imagine, and I know any number of people who will look at that label and be like, yeah, that's nice. It's not going to happen to me today,
Well, not today.
right?
It will take a little time.
No, but I mean, it's going to take a little time, and frankly, crossing thresholds for greenhouse emissions and tipping climate to a point where you end up with a hothouse ocean planet is going to take a little bit of time too, but it's still happening on our watch,
True.
right?
I will say, I want to say it was in the UK. We put pictures of the organs, like a heart or the lungs, from a smoker.
Yeah,
I want to say
yeah,
we had it
creative,
on the packet of cigarettes.
creative.
Um, so you saw, like, this is what your lungs will look like if you keep going.
Yeah,
And I want to say
creative.
it was effective. I don't know how many people stopped. Um, but I mean, it's true. Like, if you turned around, I mean, I know drinking alcohol is bad for you. But I'm lots of people probably, am I going to be more people drink alcohol than smoke? I'm going to.
Well, I mean, that might well be the case. And then also, if you think about head and neck cancer, the combination of smoking and drinking actually
Mm.
significantly synergizes to potentiate the likelihood of head and neck cancer,
And then
right?
you add drinking coffee on top of it, because I used to
Yes.
add caffeine when I used to make my cancers worse
Yes,
in the lab.
exactly. And I think the thing is that there are defaults in our scientific culture, and there are defaults in our culture at large. And North America has an interesting default around health. And that is that health is achieved by the treatment and curing of illnesses. It's not achieved by prevention. So we accept in North America, and I think it is my old boss was a Brit, and so he and I used to have some philosophical conversations about the difference between how the NHS operated versus how universal healthcare in Canada operates, or how healthcare in the UK or in the US operates. Um, and And so in North America, there's this presupposition that you're going to get sick. And so the entire healthcare system, irrespective of how it's funded, the entire healthcare system is built upon the assumption that you will get sick. And so therefore the healthcare system is built around acute care. It's not built around management, it's not built around rehabilitation, it's not built around chronic anything, it's built around acute care, right? And not every country has made that supposition, and therefore not every country frames their healthcare in exactly the same way. And so in that context, if you think about smoking, again, as sort of the specific example that we're talking about here, if you think about smoking, you smoke, you're going to get sick from smoking, so we'll invest all of the money in the anti-EGFR inhibitors, right? And we'll invest a lot of effort in genome diagnostics to determine if you're going to be resistant to any of them, right? Because we can type your EGFR, right? And then we can create new drugs that will actually target those resistant forms specifically to develop new resistance and create new drugs for those, and so on, et cetera, and so forth, instead of researching what would it actually take to prevent, right? And so we accept things as a given. And once we put ourselves in those boxes, once we accept the premises and we never question those premises, then the peer review system automatically is going to be biased because it doesn't lift itself out of the space, right? And again, all of that without talking about idea.
Yeah, that's true. So thank you for joining me today, Mahadio. We have one more video left. Let's do some bonuses. So please come back and watch the next video where we're going to be talking about success. And please like and subscribe and go and find Mahadio over at IdeaSTEM. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.